Good morning, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and this is the Daily Brief. If you're looking for Ukraine war news, I do this every day. Please subscribe if you're not already. I also do three big stories in the evening, and the three big stories just cover larger political events that are shaping the war in Ukraine. Okay, let's get right into it. 1,110 Russians off the battlefield. That's about consistent with where we've been for the last 2 months. 13 tanks. Remember, replacement value for tanks is about 4 a day. So every 4 that the Ukrainians take off the battlefield, the Russians can immediately replace that with the factories that are repurposing old tanks or bringing new ones back into life, into service. 36 armored combat vehicles, 4 artillery pieces, 57 vehicles and fuel tanks, 8 special equipment. I want to look back at the tanks here because this is interesting to me. Russia has lost at least 100 state-of-the-art T90M tanks. This conclusion was reached by analysts at Oryx Portal. Putin called these tanks the best in the world, but the battlefield has changed. Like, tanks are actually really vulnerable to drone and that kind of attack now, where they weren't in the past. Okay, so here is Andrew Perpetua's list of what he has been able to tabulate from visual recognition of vehicles, tanks, other things that have been hit by either side. And it's about even, but even isn't even. Remember, this is now a war of attrition. Russia basically has a 3-to-1 kind of advantage, and I'm really comfortable when I see about 3-to-1, which happens quite often, actually. Okay, air defense shoots down Shaheeds, another 2 lost in the Belarus sky. That's absolutely fascinating to me that this happened again. In the past 24 hours, from July 15 to 16, 2024, the air defense destroyed 2 Shahed drones. Another 2 Shaheeds were lost in the sky of Belarus. Like, what's causing these Shaheeds to malfunction? This happened 2 days ago, I think, where a Shahed drone went way over Belarus, like way deep into Belarus, and yeah, well, I just don't understand. Okay, according to the latest updates, over the past 24 hours, the enemy forces fired 1 missile, dropped 135 guided bombs during 131 airstrikes, launched 909 kamikaze drones. They're not talking about the Shaheeds, they're talking about these smaller drones. 909 kamikaze drones, mounted 4,323 shelling attacks, including 139 from MLRs on the positions of our troops and settlements, it said in a report as of 8 a.m. on Tuesday. So yeah, it's still pretty hot. Now, these drones, it's really interesting how this is working out too, because we think, okay, what kind of technological advantage can we get? Andrew Perpetua again, it's insane to me that prop planes were never supplied to Ukraine. People have been so focused on the wrong assets. It's been clear since day one that prop planes would have been one of the most significant military upgrades Ukraine could get. And if they were provided on day one, this war could be very different today. They could have been hunting and destroying recon drones this entire time, denying Russia the ability to plan their missile raids and correct their artillery fire and airstrikes. This would have crippled the Russian military. Instead, we put all of our money into defense, which could not be delivered in the time frames or the quantities to actually defend Ukraine. He might be onto something. I've seen people, videos of people shooting like with a rifle from inside a prop plane at little drones and knocking them down. I mean, it's yeah, okay. At any rate, it's just an interesting thought. Okay, what are the Ukrainians doing now? There's a fire in the vicinity of Privitny in occupied Crimea. The cause is still unknown. The Kursk governor claimed that Ukrainians attack on an industrial facility overnight. A fire at a Russian low-voltage equipment plant has been blamed on a Ukrainian drone attack. And here's a view of that. This isn't the view of that. Ukrainian border guards destroy a Russian Pegram RTR-150 video surveillance station in northern Ukraine using 4 FPV drones, and they just keep hammering it and hammering it and hammering it. Here's the power equipment generation plant. Local Russian authorities published photos of the consequences of the drone attack on a low-voltage equipment plant in Kursk region of Russia. This is what I had these out of sequence. I apologize. With Russian air defense units all busy being destroyed in Ukraine or protecting Putin's palaces, Russian factories continue to be victimized by vengeful Ukrainian drones. And this is a cement factory. Okay, so the Ukrainians keep doing this, and they keep trying to strike at these targets while Russia is, not worried about whether they hit civilian targets or not. I thought this article was interesting. The U.S. limits Ukraine's strike range to prevent broader conflict, says the Pentagon. It goes down and talks about we don't want to see unintended consequences. But there are unintended consequences to your trying not to have unintended consequences. And so what I mean by that is, so here's the definition first. The outcomes of a purposeful action that are not intended or foreseen, right? You can't see what you can't see. We all know that. We understand that. But we do know that the permission granted by the United States and other allies to Ukrainians to use Western weapons for strikes on Russian territory has had a huge impact on the situation at the front. And we only got to that place where they were allowed to do that because the situation around Kharkiv was so desperate that they had to do that. So they were like, okay, well, we don't want to do this because we didn't want to, create these unintended consequences, but they allowed just a little bit and with powerful results that they didn't even think that they could achieve. But yeah, so there's unintended consequences to trying not to have unintended consequences sometimes, and that's where we are. Controlling the skies is crucial to winning the war, but where's the clear path to victory? So the F-16s are starting to land. According to Kaliba, they were on ground or in transit or something. We can't tell. They were delivered, he said, just the other day. And we don't know enough. Maybe there's operational security or something to this. But even when they're there, what exactly will cause them to have victory, especially if you can't actually strike into these places in Russia? Okay. Turning to political events, Orban calls on the EU to resume relations with Russia. Okay, Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, has called on the European Union to resume active diplomatic relations with Russia, as well as talks with China on a peace conference. Okay, so he was visiting Zelensky, Putin, Xi, and in going to do this, he was visiting them as soon as he had assumed the presidency of the European Council, the rotating presidency of this, but he can't really speak for them. They speak with one voice through the chief diplomat, who is now Kaja Kallas from Estonia, who's now officially become the chief diplomat of the EU. You speak with one voice. It's almost like the board member of a company, one rogue board member who's saying, like, I speak for the board, and no, the chair of the board speaks for the board on behalf of the board, and he's not that person for the EU. Okay. He criticized the U.S. President Joe Biden, saying that he is allegedly not in a position to change the current pro-war policy of the USA and therefore cannot be expected to start a new policy. On the other hand, Orban praised Trump for possibly ending the war in Ukraine. I can say with certainty that immediately after his election victory, he will not wait until his inauguration. Well, he has to wait until his inauguration, even if he was elected, to do anything, but will immediately be ready to act as a peace mediator. He has detailed, now, so again, that's U.S. law. You can't do that. He has detailed and well-founded plans for this, the Hungarian Prime Minister said in the letter. He also warned that a Trump election victory will be expensive for the EU. I believe that that may very well be the case, where the EU will be shouldering a huge portion of this if Trump wins. I'm more convinced that in the likely event of a victory by President Trump, the financial burden between the U.S. and the EU will change significantly to the detriment of the EU when it comes to financial support for Ukraine. That's very likely. That's very possible. Next big story, language law clause on local print media takes effect on Tuesday. Language Ombudsman. So starting in July 2019, we've seen 7 waves of implementation of a Ukrainian language law. Ukrainian language has become mandatory for most areas: advertising, education, culture, services, transport, healthcare, etc. And today, on the 5th anniversary of the law, the 8th wave starts. Article 25, regulating the use of state language by local print media, enters force. The Russians are going to absolutely flip out and say this is another proof that they're oppressing Russians because they're going to be using Ukrainian language in Ukraine. How about that? right? But the Russians, they can't stand that a former Russian or former Soviet area is no longer going to be speaking Russian as their official language, and that's telling of what the Russians think of themselves and what they think of Ukrainians. Kremlin seeks to tighten control over criticism with new legislation. A legislative proposal in Russia seeks to broaden the definition of terrorist and extremist, raising concerns about free speech. So they're doubling down on their authoritarianness, and it's going to get worse in Russia. In recent months, payments for contract with the Russian Defense Ministry have increased sharply. So it used to be, say, $2,200, and now it could be as high as $22,600. But it varies, right? It varies between one location and another. The least amount is paid in Russian Kalmykia, Smolensk region, and Kachamatka. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that, but it varies how much you're paid as a contract soldier depending on where you live in Russia, which seems weird. A year ago, Russian contract soldiers from Moscow region were paid about 6,800, and now that's 22,600. So there's a real desperate need by the Russian government for these soldiers. Information also appeared that in Russian Tatarstan, authorities are offering to pay $1,130 to those who refer recruits, but only after they go to serve. So they're paid after they actually enter service. Wow. Okay. So the long and short of this is Russia is experiencing a serious labor shortage, both in the military and with essential jobs, right? Military production, Russia produces most of its weapons itself, military factories working multiple shifts, no extra pay. Under new legislation, it's almost impossible to quit these jobs. How about that? And they're recruiting in Africa, where they've stepped up this recruitment as well. Given the heavy losses in the Russian army and the mobilization that Ukraine is carrying out, I think sooner or later Putin will have to declare mobilization, and he's trying desperately not to do that. Okay. Just a couple more things. Russian stock market, yeah, I don't see a problem, and I'm looking at this. This is over a 3-month range. So I don't know enough. I'm not enough of an economist to know what's really driving that, whether it's the war or something else, some fluke. So I can't really comment on it, but I keep seeing things about how the Russian economy is in bad shape. Meanwhile, it's hot in Ukraine. It's hot enough that if you crack an egg over a frying pan outdoors, you get something that looks like this. That seems warm to me. So now I'm showing you that because you only get maybe an hour of electricity per day, so no air conditioning. You're lucky to have electrical. Depending on where you are, it may be a few hours, but it may be only an hour in a given day. So okay, that's where they are. I'm going to leave you with this. In 16 July 1990, Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine, approved by the recently elected Parliament of the Ukrainian SSR. It was approved 355 ayes, 4 nays. Banner here read, Kyiv versus Moscow. Nothing's changed since 1990 or since the dawn of time. Ukrainians are not Russians, and they want to be their own independent people with their own sovereignty and their right to live the way that they choose. All right, my friends, that's it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.